Hi there, my name is Greg Gunther and thank you for joining me with this video where I want to share with you a number of concepts and frameworks that have in my life had huge impact on me through the time that I've been working in my life and trying to develop my own attitudes and practices around this whole thing around money and cash flow. I reflect, it strikes me as I sort of now have the privilege of working with a lot of other people and seeing some of the frustrations that they're feeling and trying to live through, and were some of the same frustrations that I had early in my life. And the thing about it is that it largely does come down to attitude, and it's our attitude towards money and some of the things that we're trying to achieve in our life that can make some of these major shifts for ourselves. So I want to share with you in this video some of that and just exactly some of the frameworks that we can apply to help us with our thinking around where it is that we're trying to get. But this concept frustration that I feel and see a lot now, I never seem to be getting ahead. Like, we can be in social functions and the conversations can be around I just never seem to have enough money, or I could never afford that, or one day when, it's the common saying, like my brother-in-law says a lot, is when I win lotto. But the reality is that it's always out there. It's never really here and now. And unfortunately, a lot of it comes down to the way that we're actually conducting ourselves and the attitudes that we have that are creating a lot of these things. And when we make those shifts for ourselves is the moment in time when we start to see some of these things becoming a reality for ourselves. So we want to move away from this why do I never seem to get ahead to putting us more back into control of our own personal situations. And this framework that I'm going to share with you today was one of the things that I came across very early in my life and had to this day still has had a major influence on the way that I've sort of conducted and moved the way through my life. So I want to share that with you today, because I think if you can grasp some of these things for yourself, you will actually be able to make some of these big shifts as you progress as well, and I believe could help overcome some of the perhaps frustrations that you're presently feeling. So it was fairly early in my life when I came across a book that was written by a fellow by the name of Robert Kiyosaki. It's called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. You may have heard of it, you may have even read it perhaps, but the concept that Robert Kiyosaki introduces in the book is a thing called Cash Flow Quadrant. There's a Cash Flow Quadrant that I want to share with you today, the 4 quadrants in the Cash Flow Quadrant, and what each of those mean, and also how we can perhaps be thinking about, first of all, where are we now in that, but where is it that we might be able to move ourselves towards, or where is it that we want to move ourselves towards, and then of course the next third thing becomes, well, how do we actually physically make those moves for ourselves, which we won't have time to get into today, but if I can introduce the concepts to you, how becomes a little bit more obvious as you apply it to your own personal situations. But just a bit of background first of all on Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki in his book talks about his poor dad as being his real dad, and his real dad was an academic working, I think, for a fairly large academic institution like a university, and had a pretty secure job. And the things that he used to instill in his son were things like, you need to go out and get a safe, secure job. And I can reflect on that in my life with my own father, when early in my life I can just remember, you need to go to university, you need to get yourself a qualification so that you can actually go and get a very secure job. And it's interesting because this is instilled in us from very early ages, so it's something that grows with us as we move through life, and we hang on to that rather tightly, this concept of getting a safe, secure job. Work hard, invest. Work ethic is something that was instilled in me, again, from a very early age. I remember working on the farm with Dad, and we would be up before the sun come up, and we'd be out there physically doing work before breakfast. And so I learned very early, it's all about hard work. And in my own case, it used to be, a lot of manual labour as well. I reflect now and think, well, Dad used to sort of always have this concept that white collar workers weren't actually working, which I found quite an interesting concept that he had. So it all had to be about manual labour. We work for money. So basically, again, it's about if we trade ourselves, our time, in return we'll get money for that. And in my early employed years, it was all about that. It was really putting in a good effort at work, getting recognised, and receiving a good salary for that. Putting creditors first, this is interesting, and I see this an awful lot now, and I was guilty of it in my very early forays into business as well, where effectively I'd be sacrificing everything. I had to make sure that my employees were paid first and foremost, and I needed to make sure that all my bills were paid on time with all my creditors. I didn't want to be tarnishing my reputation in any way, shape or form with any of my suppliers, because obviously I needed them to maintain my reputation, but also to survive in business as well when I was in business. And if there was anything left over, and invariably there wasn't much, if any, then I would actually get paid myself. So, and I remember my first years in working in business, for many, many years, I didn't draw a salary. I was paying others, and effectively they were earning more than me. And that's at times I find quite resentful, and I used to get quite frustrated by that. But I still live by this actual ideal that I had to make sure I had kept everybody happy, even if it was at the expense of my own happiness. Don't buy something until you can afford it. Again, that's a common concept that many of us might remember from our early years. And the love of money is the root of all evil. And we see that prevailing quite a bit, where on occasions people are actually relishing in the money. It's all about the money. So we find it's about the love of the money. So that's again an ideal that's instilled in us very early. So that was his poor dad, and in Kiyosaki's book he talks about that as being his real dad. That's what he grew up with. He then contrasts that with something he's labelled the rich dad, and this was a person who he worked for and with for some time that he used to look up to and felt was quite a good mentor for him in his thinking. And the contrast with the rich dad was where it was about building businesses. So his rich dad had a number of business interests, and he would be continually building those. He didn't save, he invested. So when he had money that he was coming out of his businesses, he would invest that money in more businesses. So he was building things, investing that money. The big concept was that money works for you, not the other way around. We don't work for money, we make money work for us. And this is a big thing for a lot of people that I find I'm working with right now, where we just don't quite grasp that concept that money is actually there. Our businesses actually are there to serve our needs, not the other way around. I see too many people in business that are really servants to their business, and that's a shift we have to get and make. So the next one was quite difficult for me in my early days. Pay yourself first. A lot of the good books talk about this, and they say you should actually be structuring it in such a way that you pay yourself first. But and this takes a little bit of bravery, but it works. And the way I got my head around it in my early days, and the way I used to rationalise it to myself was, from an early age I had a mortgage, and the thing was that mortgage went out every single month. To this day, I've never, when I had a mortgage, I never ever missed a mortgage payment. It just happened, like the money was automatically deducted out of my account, so I never actually got to see it. My money would go in, the money for the mortgage would go out, and the bank would be satisfied and they'd have their pay. And for some reason, whatever was left over, I would make work. And so the rationale that I applied to myself when I really was trying to get my attitude right around this was, well, if I can make it work for my mortgage, I can make it work for me. So So when I started to introduce this attitude and structure for myself, what I did was I started to put an automatic payment in place. So my money would come into a particular account, my working account. I would pay myself a wage into a separate account, and that I would then use to live off from there. I did go overboard with that. I wasn't quite that brave. I made a relatively small contribution first of all to prove it to myself, but it worked. And the reality was, and again to this day, it's exactly the same structure I use for myself today. Even though I don't have some of the same pressures that I had in those earlier years, I still use the same structure today, where I've got a separate account that I automatically have money transferred to on a regular basis. And that's the money we live off. Ask yourself if you can afford it. Slightly different shift. Don't buy something until you can afford it. Ask yourself, can you afford it? Quite a slight transition, slight shift in thinking before we just go ahead. And one of the things I find today is a lot of people seem to want things now. And in the day of credit, when we get easy access to money through credit cards and personal loans and the like, I find a lot of people are grabbing things and buying things when either they need it, it's not an investment usually, and secondly, can they actually really afford it? And it's the lack of money that's the root of all evil. His rich dad always used to say, it's the lack of the money that's the root of all evil. And certainly when I see people's frustrations, it's about the scarcity mentality that we've got towards money that is really creating a problem. And it's that lack of money that we need to start to shift, make some shifts with our attitude towards overcoming this situation. So scrapping the rat race is really what I want to talk about in this video today. How do we actually really get around this whole treadmill that a lot of us feel like we're on? It's just going, and we just don't seem to get anywhere. And this is where the concept of the cash flow quadrant that Kiyosaki talks about, I think, is really, really good. It really does talk about where it is that we're at, but importantly, it can actually map a bit of a path for us. And that's what I really want to introduce to you today in this video. So it talks about 4 quadrants, being quadrant, obviously 4, and we can begin in any one of these 4, and we might actually be transitioning, we might actually potentially, maybe we've even got our foot in a couple of these camps, but essentially there are 4 quadrants. The first one is employer, and that's the one that a lot of us would feel perhaps most familiar with. It's where we've got a job, and what we're doing is we're trading our time for money. So the thing about that is, you find with working for a job, it's somebody else telling us what we're worth. So a job is prescribed, we apply, we're successful in achieving, appointed to that job, it's got a salary and certain conditions applied to that. So in no way are we sort of involved in trying to talk about what are we really worth. So it's perhaps comes down to our negotiation skills and the employer applying an agreed salary and conditions to that particular job. But a large number of us remain as employees for most of our lives. So it's basically a job that we have. A common transition is this one down to the S, which is the self-employed, where you effectively own a job. And this is where we start to, I see it a lot in the trades, where tradies are working often, might be through their apprenticeship or through their early studies for maybe a plumber, and I'm doing all my plumbing studies and I've done my apprenticeship, and then I think, well, actually there's more to this, I can do this for myself, so I transition down to being self-employed. The thing about being self-employed is that it's still a job, and a lot of us, when we make this transition, find ourselves working a lot harder often than perhaps we were doing when we were an employee. And we have to put in more hours to make the money. But the big thing for me, when I made this transition for myself away from my corporate life as an employee into one of being self-employed in my own business was all of a sudden I had all of these things happening to me, like creditors to pay, I had accounts to do, I had employees to pay, I effectively had to be doing the business development work, all of it. And at the end of the day, somewhere in all of that, I still had to actually do the job. I had to do the work. So it just becomes this huge pressure cooker that we find ourselves sitting in. And instead of working regular hours, potentially as an employee, we find ourselves working very, very long hours and often weekends, where we physically have to trade, do more trading of our time for money, in essence, so that we can get paid. On the right-hand side, we have business owners. So effectively, what we have on the left-hand side is what we're calling active income. So this is where we're actually trading our time for money. So, but it's still a job. So it's still active that we have to be in the process of generating the money that's going to come back to us. If we move over to the right-hand side, to a business owner. Now, a business owner is slightly different in that we now are starting to employ a few people who work with us, that we can work through in order for us to generate money. So basically, we start to get a little bit of leverage coming from this. So from this perspective, we don't have as much pressure on us. So for example, we might employ a salesperson to go out and do the business development aspects of it. Maybe we can afford to have some people dealing with our accounts when we move to being a business owner. So in essence, what we're doing is we're starting to delegate a lot of the tasks to other people than ourselves, where we've had to do it before when we were in the self-employed position. The big transition I find here, or the big shift that people need to make, and it's often a difficult one, is because we're now starting to work through people, the letting go of that can often be quite difficult. And so our soft skills need to be developed when we start to get into this space. And as a business owner, it's often quite difficult for us to make some of those transitions, and that's one of the struggles that I find myself working a lot with people today. If we look at investors, investors actually have investments. So, and the definition of investment is that it's not a personal asset that's basically consuming us. It's not costing us money. An investment actually makes us money. And so from that perspective, we've made this transition to being away from necessarily actively earning or trading our time to one where we've built a number of assets that are now passively providing an income stream for us. So basically, the shift, the stark difference really between the two is this active income on the left-hand side and passive income on the right-hand side, where we're starting to generate money in a little bit more passive style, and it's a lesser involvement, if you like, of ourselves. So left-hand side we work for money, right-hand side money works for us. And that's the key difference between the two. So there's these four quadrants that we talked about. So quadrant 1 is employees, quadrant 2 is self-employed, quadrant 3 is business owner, and quadrant 4 is investors. So I'll just go back and explore those in a little bit more detail and just explain how it is that we can maybe be transitioning. As I said, with employees, what we're talking about here with employees is we're largely in a situation where we're trading our time for money for a particular job. So in my early career, basically my first job that I can remember working for someone else, I was employed to do some level of business development work. And for that, if I wanted to move away from that, and I was quite ambitious in my early years. I used to look internally whether there was other positions available in the company, and I must admit, I used to buy the Saturday paper which had a lot of the employment, and I just used to sort of gauge whether or not I was being fairly paid for what I was doing. So I was like, if I wanted to make the shifts or progression, if you like, in my career, it was going to have to come from either getting a promotion, being able to negotiate a promotion or a pay increase with my current employer, or if I could find something else that perhaps with a competitor or even a better paid job that I could apply my skills to, I'd make the shift to another job and apply for that and hopefully be successful in that. So that's largely what the life of an employee looks like. And the reality is that 95% of the population are in that space. So that's a big chunk, and don't get me wrong, it doesn't mean it's a bad thing. We need employees. Not everybody's cut out to be other than an employee, and a very good one. But a large percentage of our population never really shifts away from being an employee. We were trading our time for money. And I remember early in my life, I used to have a friend who was very, very good, technically very sound, very talented guy, and I used to think, you could just do so much more for yourself if you were to potentially go and consult for yourself. And it was interesting when I talked to him about the concepts, because the response that I got from him, which I can totally understand, was that, Greg, I've got a mortgage, I have 3 young children that I need to educate, I have a wife that I need to keep, she's at home, full-time mum, so I need the security of a job. And at that point he was working in the public service, and he had a pretty good tenure on that job and was building a reasonably good solid superannuation and underneath all of that. So I totally got what he was talking about. And but the frustration I used to feel, more for me than him, was that he could just do so much more. For me, he was so underemployed, but it was going to be always working for that safety and that security. So, and the irony of all of that, because he was in the public service, is that these days, as we perhaps all know, public service perhaps isn't quite as secure as we once thought it was. But it was just an interesting concept for me. Self-employed is where we start to move away from perhaps an employed situation to one where we start to work for ourselves. And again, as I said earlier, this is common in the trades. You see a lot of people move away from their trade into a situation where maybe after four years or so, perhaps more, working with an employer, done all my apprenticeships, I've got all my grounding, I've probably built up a number of my own tools and equipment and skills, got a bit of experience. I'll go and do this for myself. And what happens to a lot of us is, in this situation, is that we end up working so much harder often as a consequence of all of that, because we have, as I said earlier, all these other pressures of accounts. We have creditors, we have employees often that we have to pay, we have business development work to do, and all these pressures start to really come down on us. And both of these quadrant 1s and quadrant 2s are where we are still trading actively ourselves, our time, for money. And it often becomes quite a frustrating thing. And the thing I see a lot when I'm working with self-employed people today is this burnout. They're working so hard, they're tired, they're frustrated, and we have a lot of these secondary issues starting to arise. It might show up through health, it might show up through just being totally exhausted. And I'm witnessing a lot of that happening these days, particularly in the space of self-employed. Business owners, on the other hand, this is where we start to let go of a few things, and we've perhaps had the luxury of being able to appoint an accounts person or a salesperson. And what we're doing now is we've built a sizable business, we've had some success, and now all of a sudden we can find ourselves in a little bit more of a relaxed position of being able to work through some others. This comes with challenges though, and this is an area that I work a lot in with people right now, where business owners have often come across from a self-employed position, and it starts by often having to employ some other people. Like the workloads become such that I need to employ some extra hands to help me get the job done. So all of a sudden I have an employee that I need to manage, and sometimes those employees, the recruitment process that I typically find people do is flawed, it's underdone, and often the people that we employ don't show up the way that we want them to show up. They do things differently, or perhaps there's been some things go wrong that we're not really skilled to managing with when they do crop up. So the skills that I find people not having when we move into this transition of being a business owner can be very, very challenging, and it does require a lot more soft skills. The second big thing I find for business owners that's very challenging is this concept of actually letting go. I find so many business owners these days that just need to keep such a tight control on things that largely the frustrations prevail because people don't really fully understand what it is that you're wanting them to do. They're not really clearly articulated. Because I have to keep such a tight control on things, everything has to come back through me. So in essence, what I become is the blockage. Nothing gets done in the business because nobody's going to do anything in the business without running it through me or by me first. So as a business owner, I actually do, in many cases, become the problem when it comes to this. So letting go is the second thing that I commonly find. The third big thing I find for business owners is a challenge is that we're often trying to put more business through systems that we had when we were self-employed. And a lot of those systems, unfortunately, when we were self-employed, are in our head. They're not very well documented. The ones that we did have then perhaps don't have the robustness to push more business through them anyway. We find errors and inefficiencies creeping in because people are all doing things differently, so there's no real consistency in the way that we are applying processes and procedures to things, and what that can actually eventuate in is a lot of errors, mistakes. We're doing things perhaps when we don't need to be doing them, and so this whole area of what we call waste starts to creep into the business, where we have a lot of inefficiencies. So for business owners, there's challenges there. We're moving to the right-hand side, it's quadrant 3, so we're moving into the passive income stage where we're starting to work through others, but it comes with its challenges. And those three things of basically being able to employ a few people, working through others, letting go, with having to trust people now to do things, and systems and procedures are the things that provide, for me, the three sort of key challenges when we confront this, and we as business owners need to start to upskill ourselves in a lot of those areas so that we can be effective as a business owner. But it's a move in the right direction. Quadrant 4 is the ideal, and I can say to you that only 5% of the population actually sit in this quadrant, so it's not many of us. But the astute people amongst us who, in our business life, in our businesses, are starting to pay ourselves first, and we're putting money aside, and we're placing that money that we're putting aside in investments, and we're growing those investments, can make this transition towards investors. Because if we're consistent and disciplined at doing that, we are truly in a position where money starts to work for us. So now the key difference that I talked about a little bit earlier with an investment versus a personal asset is an investment actually needs to generate an income. It needs to grow, and it's not one that's going to consume us. So I remember having a lot of interesting debates and discussions on this, and I confess that I used to see this to create and spark the debate, but I used to talk to the people a lot about their home. Is your home, your family home, an investment, or is it actually a personal asset, a liability? And it always would create some interesting debate. The default for people, of course, was that it was an investment. A family home is an investment. And I used to counter that by saying, well, so if it's an investment, does it make you money? And people would say, well, yes, like it's going to grow in value. And I'd say, well, yes. So if it's investment, when are you actually going to realise some of that capital growth? When are you actually going to cash that in so that you can actually create your passive income from that? And of course the response was, well, no, that's the roof over my head. So, and I'd said, well, my definition of investment is that it actually has to make you money. So if you're not going to ever realise your asset in that cashing in your home and realising that money so that you can actually have it creating an income for you, in my definition, that's not an investment at all. It's actually a liability. So now I purposely used to see that to create the debate, and I'm not suggesting for a moment that we don't buy our own homes. In fact, there's a lot of good arguments to say it's a forced saving, and we do create our equity in our home. So it's often one of the biggest saving mechanisms that we can have for ourselves. But it's just to try and get people understanding the difference between an investment and an actual liability. Investments need to be working for us. They need to be generating and growing in such a way that in time to come, they're going to create and generate the passive income for us. So as I said, only 5% of people sit in this space, in this quadrant, but it's the ideal place for us to be thinking as we're moving through the other quadrants to transition ourselves towards being. And the key concept in getting yourself towards this space is grasping, for me, one of the big things for this is learning how to pay ourselves first, and then whatever we're saving from that we're putting into investment and creating that income. So, as I said, there's the 4 quadrants: employer, self-employed, business owner, investor. The only way really for us to be escaping that rat race is to be moving ourselves around that quadrant and as quickly as we possibly can away from active income towards passive income. And that's when we'll start to realise those benefits. If we're going to be in the business owner space, as I said, we need to be carefully looking at a number of areas. The 3 key areas that I talked about are learning some of our soft skills, upskilling ourselves in the world of business, and particularly in the area of soft skills, where we need to work with and through people. The second area I talked about in business is the importance of letting go. It's one of the biggest challenges I find. The fact that we now need to trust people. We don't want to become the blockage in our business. So we need to learn to let go and start to let people step up and take responsibility and be that leader for them, not their manager, the leader, where we're actually helping them become better at what they do. And the third area is the systems and processes. So if we can concentrate on those 3 challenges as you transition from being self-employed to business owner, you'll actually find life gets a lot easier in the world of business. When we get to that point, we need to be thinking about quadrant 4, which is the investor, which is saying that we are going to be putting money into things that are going to grow over the course of time and create a passive income for us through the course of time. So I hope you've enjoyed that concept. As I said, in my life, this cash flow quadrant was one that had some of the very, very early impacts for me in terms of my way of thinking. I said at the top, it's really about attitude, and we actually get to choose how we progress in our lives. It's not up to anybody else, it's up to us. And largely with these concepts that I've talked to you about here in this video, they are really ones of attitude. And anybody can do this. Anybody can actually make these transitions through these quadrants if they choose to. It's just all about how we apply it. So I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you've got something from that, and I look forward to sharing more of this information with you in future videos.